Well, friends, I want to begin by sharing with you a very touching story sent to me by some good friends in the congregation. And it reads that time is like a river. You cannot touch the water twice because the flow that has passed will never ever pass again. So enjoy every moment of life. As a bagpiper, I play many gigs. Recently, I was asked by a funeral director to play at a graveside service for a homeless man. He had no family or friends, so the service was to be at a pauper's cemetery in the Nova Scotia backcountry. As I was not familiar with the backwoods, I got lost. And being a typical man, I did not stop for directions. I finally arrived an hour late, and I saw the funeral guy had evidently gone, and the hearse was nowhere in sight. There were only the diggers and crew left, and they were eating lunch. I felt badly, and I apologized to the men for being late. I went to the side of the grave and looked down, and the vault lid was already in place. I didn't know what else to do, so I started to play. The workers put down their lunches and began to gather around. I played out my heart and soul for this man with no family or friends. I played like I've never played before for this homeless man. And as I played Amazing Grace, the workers began to weep. They wept, I wept, we all wept together. And when I finished, I packed up my bagpipes and started for my car. And though my head was hung low, my heart was full. As I opened the car door, I heard one of the workers say, "I ain't never seen anything like that before. And I've been putting in septic tanks for 20 years. Yes. It's all right to laugh. Jesus told us said a lot of funny things. Trust me. You'll just have to trust me on that. Well, what is it? What is it that makes a person free? What is it that makes a person free? That's certainly, friends, an appropriate question for this Sunday after our 4th of July celebrations. What makes us free? By the way, do you know what famous event we were really commemorating this past week? Not sure? A little bit rusty on your 6th grade civics? Well, you're in good company, friends. A Gallup poll reveals that one out of every 4 Americans does not know that July 4th commemorates the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And even more amazing, the same number cannot tell you which country we declared independence from. They don't know. In our 4th of July festivities, we celebrated our freedom. And in our lessons from the epistles, St. Paul writes, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. So stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Christ has set us free. He has set us free. So we ask, what is it that makes us free? Now, just because we live in a free country does not make us free. There are many people, I assure you, in our country who live in one form of bondage or another. If you're a young person, you may think that becoming an adult means freedom, but most adults will tell you in moments of honesty that they're not free. They've simply exchanged one set of shackles for another. So what truly is it that makes us free? Now, St. Paul knew what it was to be free. He lived part of his life in chains, a good portion of it behind bars, but he still knew more freedom, friends, than most of us will ever know. Why? Why? A church consultant, John Maxwell, suggests 3 reasons. St. Paul had nothing to hide, he had nothing to lose, and nothing to fear. Now, I want you to think about those 3 elements for just a few moments, and you'll know what true freedom is. Nothing to hide, nothing to lose, and nothing to fear. So let's begin with nothing to hide. Nothing to hide. Friends, it's terrible. It's terrible to go through life with a secret sin rattling around in your closet. There is no emotion that can enslave us quite like guilt. It's terrible. It's terrible to go through your life looking over your shoulder, always wondering if someone's going to discover your dirty little secret. The freedom for some of us would be the knowledge that we have nothing to hide. That was part of the freedom, to be sure, part of the freedom that St. Paul enjoyed. No hidden sin weighed him down. Now, that didn't mean that he never sinned, because I know somebody's going to come up and ask me that. I'm certainly not saying that. It doesn't mean that he never sinned. He had sinned. In fact, he participated in one of the saddest crimes in all of human history, the stoning death of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. But that was in Paul's past. That was in his past, friends, and it was way out in the open. You'll remember how the small Christian community at first, they just outright refused to admit Paul into their fellowship. And you can understand why. They didn't trust him. They didn't trust him. That's one of the reasons, was his complicity in Stephen's death. But once it was all out in the open, and once he had repented of it, that sin no longer had any power over him. This is one of the reasons that confession of one's sins has such liberating power. Once a sin is confessed, it no longer enslaves us. It's out in the open. We never, ever again have to worry about it being discovered. Sin and guilt both enslave. And we make a major step toward freedom when we eliminate both of these from our lives. St. Paul writes, this is verse 17, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. For the sinful nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. They are in conflict with each other. So, part of the freedom that Paul enjoyed was that he had nothing to hide. Well, he also had nothing to lose. Nothing to lose, friends. His well-being was not tied. His well-being's not tied to a house, to a car, to a job, or the esteem of his peers. All these, without a doubt, they'd all been long left behind. Even as he languished in jail with chains on his wrists and his ankles, in many ways he was freer than the men who guarded him. You remember rock star Janis Joplin sang, "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose." Well, there's some truth to that. There's some truth to that, friends. Many people are captive to their possessions and lifestyle. I'm reminded, there's so many examples I'd just like pick one. You remember this story about Zsa Zsa Gabor? You remember this? She's pulled over by police years ago. Pulled over by police for having expired registration tags. Police reports of the incident reveal this bizarre exchange between Gabor and the arresting officer. First, she claimed to have overpaid her registration, so the DMV didn't give her any tags. This was widely publicized. Maybe you remember this. Then the officer discovers a number of discrepancies, let's say, discrepancies in Zsa Zsa Gabor's driver's license. The date of birth and weight were wrong. The stout actress claimed to be 110 pounds. Now, you know better than that. She was not 110 pounds. The actress claimed, here's what she claimed, that illegal immigrants stole her license. Illegal immigrants stole her license, changed her personal stats to make her seem younger and thinner than she really was, and then the illegal immigrants returned her license to her. Finally, Gabor ended up slapping the officer. Slapped the officer. That doesn't go over well, does it? She slapped the officer when he tried to arrest her. Later, after her trial, Gabor claimed she was convicted because no one, quote unquote, from her class of people was on the jury. Okay? Now, we don't want to judge Miss Gabor. That's not the point. We don't have all the relevant details, perhaps. But it wouldn't be surprising. It wouldn't be surprising if a person in her situation would live in fear of losing much that was hers. She lived as one of the glamorous people. What happens if you lose that glamour? When you're not as slim or youthful as you once were. When you're no longer in the running for the high-paying starring roles, when that's all gone. You understand, the more you have, and the more these things define who you are, the more you live in fear that these things one day will be taken from you. You become the bird in the gilded cage. And while the cage may be gilded indeed, it remains a cage. St. Paul was free. He was free because he had nothing to lose. The sooner you and I realize we have nothing to lose, the happier we will be. There was once a 12-year-old boy who had been given an assignment by his father to work in the yard, and the boy then turned around and he hires his 6-year-old brother to do the work for him. And he told the 6-year-old that their daddy had paid him a quarter to do the work, and if the 6-year-old would do the job, he would let him hold the quarter until supper time. Well, the little kid worked hard. He works hard all afternoon, got to get the job done. The big brother, true to the bargain, gave him the quarter. You can hold this until supper time, but then you have to give it back. Well, the father, a wealthy industrialist who worked hard 7 days a week, came home late that afternoon. He spotted his youngest son with the quarter. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. "Well, my brother let me hold it since I did his work in the yard." "You're holding it?" "Yes," he said. "I have to give it back at supper time." "Well, that's crazy. That's crazy," the dad said. "That's the most stupid thing I've ever heard. You worked hard all afternoon just to hold the money?" The little kid looked at his dad and said, "But Daddy, isn't that what you're doing too?" And the child's dead right. He's dead right. All we get to do is hold it for a while. That's all we get to do. There's nothing on this earth that is permanently ours. And yet many of us, think about it, many of us spend our entire lives worrying worrying about what would happen if we lost our money, worrying if we lost our jobs, worrying if we lost our homes, worrying lost our health, worrying if we lose our looks. Friends, accept it now that one day it is all going to be taken from you. And if that truth troubles you, we know we're on the right track, don't we? Because you know it's true. You better quit worrying and begin living. Begin living, friends. St. Paul had nothing to hide, and he had nothing to lose. And one more thing, he had nothing to fear. Nothing to fear. The world is filled with people who are in bondage to fear. Fear about losing their jobs, fear about losing their health, fear about old age, fear about family members, and a host of other troubling fears. But Christ can help us with our fear, always and forever. I've got a desk fixture on my office desk here. Many of you have seen it. It's etched glass, and I've got icons actually kind of hidden all over I'm a big icon believer. I see it as the exact same thing as memorizing scripture. And when I'm having a particularly troubling day, I like to look at that glass icon, be still and know. I've got them all over Lori's house, our house. I've got those icons everywhere to remind me, to help keep me calm and help keep me focused. And there are some days I don't come off that way, but you should see me if I'm not meditating on that stuff. You should see that. It really helps. It helps keep me calm and focused, reminding me that God's always there. Try it. It really helps. Whatever situation I'm in. St. Paul was devoid of fear. He trusted God so much there was nothing in which his captors could threaten him. He had no property for him to take away. He didn't have any. He'd already experienced the lashes of the whip. Death. In Philippians 1:21, St. Paul writes, "For to me, to live is Christ. To die is gain." For me to live is Christ. To die, that's gain. What do you do with somebody like that? Even death holds no fear for him. None. What do you do with somebody like that? You cannot enslave a person if they're so committed to an idea or a cause that fear becomes inconsequential. Senator John McCain spent 5.5 years as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, and he tells of one man with whom he was imprisoned. His name was Lieutenant Commander Mike Christian. And what Mike had done, Mike had collected scraps of white and red cloth, and he had sewed the scraps together into an American flag. He then sewed this makeshift flag to the inside of his blue pajama top. And the men, what they do at night, they would hang up Mike's pajama top on a wall each night and say the Pledge of Allegiance to it. And it was a ritual. It was a ritual that brought them all together and reminded them of their purpose. One day the guards happened to catch the men saying the pledge, and they dragged Mike away and beat him brutally. But that very night, when Mike returned to his cell, he began gathering pieces of cloth again. He's already starting on another flag. What do you do with people who will not be intimidated? What do you do with people who are so committed to a cause that fear becomes inconsequential? Now, that was the kind of man that St. Paul was. He was a man who had nothing to hide. What he preached, he lived. He was a man who had nothing to lose. He was a man of great intellect. He wrote approximately half of our New Testament. had a fine education, many, many talents, but everything he had was committed to Christ. Christ alone. Nothing to fear. For me to live is Christ. To die is gain. That's gain. Wouldn't you like to live as freely as St. Paul? Amen and amen.